everybody, I'm Joe the Disney Guy, and it took a little while, but we finally reached the end of the time period that I like to call the Golden Age of Disney Animation, which means it's time for another era retrospective. But before we get into that, let's talk about this era in Disney history a little bit.
So, let's address the elephant in the room. Why is my interpretation of the Golden Age different than what some other people say? Well, it's true. A lot of people separate Disney's first 5 films, dubbed the Big Five, from the rest, and call everything from 1950 to 1959 a sort of second Golden Age.
So why do I group them all together? Well, to make it easier to remember, duh! But in all seriousness, I do have my reasons.
As I said in my very first Disney history lesson,
which you can conveniently find right here,
I tend to break eras up in terms of both time period and film characteristics. There's no denying that all of these films are very similar in a lot of ways. Almost all of them were big-budget productions that were heavily influenced and oversaw by Walt Disney, and they were all made using traditionally animated hand-drawn cells. But I think the big detail that a lot of people overlook is that most of these movies were in some form of development before World War II. I don't think it's much of a stretch to say that if it weren't for the biggest war in human history effectively shutting down Disney's feature film department, these movies all would have been released in succession, without the 8-year break in the middle that some people use to split the era into 2.
So, long story short, I group this era a bit differently than most people. Does that mean that I'm wrong? I don't think so. Does it mean that people who split the era are wrong? Of course not. It's just different interpretations of the same stuff.
Now that all that's out of the way, why do we call this the Golden Age anyway? Well, it's simple really. Many people view this time and these movies as the gold standard of Disney animation, and I myself credit the era with laying the groundwork for the rest of the studio's history. I mean, really think about it for a second. Within a little over 20 years, Disney established, perfected, and then expanded upon its own unique style and genre of animation, which is a pretty impressive feat all things considered. And the long-standing effect and popularity of nearly every film in the era have ensured its place as one of, if not the, most popular eras in Disney animation.
So with all that said, it's high time we jump into some of my favorite parts of the Golden Age.
Let's kick things off with one of the toughest categories I had to decide on, and that's favorite character. The Golden Age had so many memorable and lively characters that it's really hard to pick a favorite, but I narrowed it down to 3. First off is the boy who won't grow up, Peter Pan. Something about Peter's devil-may-care attitude is just fun to watch. Yes, he can be a bit immature at times, but it's that immaturity that enabled him to be such a well-rounded character by the end of the film, and I can appreciate that. Whether he's flirting with mermaids, battling Captain Hook, or flying off to Neverland, Peter's just enjoyable whenever he's on screen. Next, I have the fairies from Sleeping Beauty. I mentioned it in my last review, but I really think that the fairies are arguably the true main characters of Sleeping Beauty. They help drive the story and really are the ones who deal most directly with the main conflict of the movie. The fairies are also very unique from one another, and it makes it fun to watch the 3 different personalities play off of each other, especially between Flora and Merryweather.
And yes, I know that the fairies are 3 characters and not 1, which means that I, in essence, picked 5 characters and not 3 like I said I would. But 1, the fairies are always seen together in the film, so it makes it a little hard for me to differentiate them individually. And 2, this is really hard, okay? So just cut me some slack.
And the last character I wanted to mention was Jiminy Cricket from Pinocchio. Everybody's favorite conscience is really the glue that holds together the story of Pinocchio. But more than just that, he's such a symbol of Disney that it's hard not to love him. Yeah, he can be a little rough around the edges at times, but that's kind of what I like about him. He's not perfect, but he knows right from wrong and always strives to keep Pinocchio on the straight and narrow so that he can reach his goal. Really, when you think classic Disney characters, Jiminy is bound to come up, and for good reason. Now, we can't talk characters without mentioning the baddies, and the Golden Age had its fair share of great villains. Although every villain has their memorably evil moments, how can you not give the best villain to the Queen of Evil herself, Maleficent? She just has a presence about her, between her look, her voice, and her actions, that just let you know right from the start that she is not a woman to be messed with. And her transformation into the powerful dragon helped drive possibly the best and most exciting climax in Disney history. A powerful adversary with evil intentions, there's no denying that Maleficent is the top baddie of the Golden Age.
Honestly, when it comes down to the characters, if you ask me a month or 2 from now, I'd probably give you a totally different list of my favorites compared to the one that I just gave, which is a testament both to the quality of the characters in this era and to my crippling inability to actually make decisions.
Of course, you can't have a great Disney movie without great music, but before I get into my favorite overall music from the era, I think we need to make special mention of Fantasia. If we were just going off the merits of score alone, Fantasia would be hands down the best, as every song featured in the film is a masterpiece within its own right.
Really, the only reason why I'm not saying that Fantasia has the best score of the era is because, for as great as the songs are, I can't really credit them to Disney, which almost makes it feel like cheating, if that makes sense.
So, if we're going off of original Disney music, I actually have a tie for this one between Bambi and Cinderella. Bambi is here because I think that the instrumental score in the movie is as good a score as Disney has put out. The film focuses a lot on changing seasons, and the music certainly reflects that. And in a film that's so predicated on emotion, it's the music that really helps sell to the audience what emotion they should be feeling. On the other end of the spectrum is Cinderella. While Cinderella also had a great score, its collection of songs was, in my opinion, the best of the era. If you remember, Walt hired guys from Tin Pan Alley to help write the songs for Cinderella, and what they came up with is really a perfect blend of poppy and classic, which makes for a collection of memorable and timeless songs.
And speaking of timeless songs, it's time to look at my favorite song from the era. But again, there's so many great songs to choose from that it seemed kinda wrong to highlight only one. So here are my top 3 favorite songs of the Golden Age.
Number 3 is He's a Tramp from Lady and the Tramp. If you've watched the channel regularly, I think you've picked up by now that I like the jazzy stuff, and He's a Tramp definitely embodies that. It's sultry and almost different sounding for a Disney movie, but that's kinda why I like it. Factor in that it adds to the mystique of the tramp, and you have a pretty memorable song. Number 2 is A Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes from Cinderella. I just talked about how Cinderella had the best songs from the era, so it would be a little silly for me not to include one of them in my top 3. But the difficult part was, which song should I include? There really was no wrong answer here, as just about every song from Cinderella is catchy, memorable, and classic. But I gave the nod to A Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes for a couple reasons. For one, it's the first real song in the movie, and after the delay of the wartime era, was important in returning Disney films to normalcy per se. And also, the song just embodies so many classic Disney tropes, the longing for more, the idea of dreaming, and it really encompasses a lot of my favorite aspects of Disney. But speaking of my favorite aspects of Disney, number 1 is of course When You Wish Upon a Star from Pinocchio. I talked about this briefly in my top 10 reasons why I love Disney video, but I adore When You Wish Upon a Star. It's the de facto theme song for Disney, and for me personally, there's no song in the Disney library that inspires me more to chase my dreams and shoot for the stars. Both as a kid and still today, When You Wish Upon a Star resonates with me, and it's one of my favorite Disney songs of all time. But as you all know, I can't talk about Disney movies without talking about the story behind the Disney movies. And in the Golden Age, there's really no better story than the one behind Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I mean, what more can I say that hasn't already been said? It was an absolute shot in the dark from Walt Disney. He pushed all of his chips to the middle on an idea that, if it worked, would launch his company into a new stratosphere. And if it failed, the company would be done.
Honestly, it's still incredible to me that this story has never been adapted to film. I mean, we do love our do-or-die underdog stories, don't we? And yeah, we know what the ending is gonna be, but that didn't stop them from making Saving Mr. Banks, right?
The story behind Snow White will probably forever be my favorite behind-the-scenes tale, and it's really the reason that I started to get into researching how Disney movies got made in the first place. And I mean, without this story, there wouldn't be any other stories to tell or movies to talk about, so of course it has to be my favorite story of the era.
Alright guys, it's almost time for the big one, my favorite movie of the era. But before we get there, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about my least favorite movie of the Golden Age.
For the most part, I enjoyed just about every movie in the era, or at least saw aspects in them that I could appreciate. But the one film that I've just never really been able to get into is Alice in Wonderland. I talked a lot more at length about this in my review of the film, but something about the broken up nature of the story and the weak main character just never sat right with me. And not for nothing, but for the film with the most songs of any Disney film, there's not really a lot of memorable or classic ones, which always seem kinda odd to me. Like I said in my review, if you like surreal animation and this style of film, more power to you, but for me, it just doesn't work.
But enough about the negatives. This was a fantastic era, and although there are so many great choices to choose from, my favorite film of the Golden Age is...
Cinderella. Yeah, if you were following along with the video, I suppose this wasn't much of a surprise. But like I've said in the past, Cinderella really is the quintessential classic Disney film to me. It has fun characters, a great villain, beautiful animation, and as we talked about before, every song is a classic. And I mean, it's one of the most perfect Disney fairy tales and princess movies that they've ever brought to the screen, and that's saying something. Don't get me wrong, the vast majority of the Golden Age films are fantastic and classics in their own right, but for my money, there's nothing that can beat Cinderella.
Well guys, that about wraps it up for me this week. Hope you all enjoyed, and let me know what your choices in some of these categories would have been. Also be sure to check out last week's video and next week's video. If you like this video and you want a more in-depth review of some of these movies, make sure you check out the Disney Guy Review playlist. Also, in case you missed the announcement last week, I've rebooted my Twitter, and you can find me and follow me at that link. It's the one-stop place if you want to get updates on the channel, updates on me, or just want to talk about Disney movies or ask me questions. Alright guys, make sure you check out the links all around, and I'll see you all next week.